It's not a budget merely for votes of 2024, but a budget to pave the way for 2047, what the Prime Minister has called the first budget of Amrit Kal. This year's focus in the budget has been on sustained growth and not just handing out goodies for quick returns. We will break down this year's budget and tell you how it hopes to give the economy the incentive needed to boost growth, spur consumption and ensure our spending power is increased while it trims out subsidies which for long have burdened our public coffers. First, let's talk about how the budget has been hailed by experts and called pro-growth and forward-looking. This aligns with the government's Mission 2047. Capital outlay for 2023-24 has been raised to 10 lakh crores, which will take the GDP ratio to 3.3% at a 20-year high. The 33% boost to capital expenditure and higher allocation for infrastructure will boost the economy, not just help in ease of living, but will also create jobs and increase the purchasing power of people, leading to increased consumption and ensuring a domestic-centric economy. The budget, meanwhile, also emphasizes on boosting savings by public. For the first time, Finance Ministry announced a new scheme for women called Mahila Samman Saving Certificate. A time-bound, one-time, new small savings scheme which will offer interest rate of 7.5% for a maximum deposit of 2 lakh rupees.
जो आज अनएम्प्लॉयड यूथ है, उनके नौकरी के लिए उन्होंने नहीं कही। हालांकि पहले तो उन्होंने ही कहा था कि हमने हर साल 2 करोड़ नौकरियां हमारे युवाओं को देंगे, तो उनके 18 करोड़ नौकरियां कहाँ हैं?
Let me begin by pointing out with regret that the FM has not mentioned the words unemployment, poverty, inequality or equity anywhere in her speech.
বাড়িয়েছে 70 টাকা আর কমিয়েছে 4 টাকা। এবার বলবে কমালোকে বিজেপি ভোট দাও, বলে দিচ্ছি এসো। এই বাজেট নট ফিউচারিস্টিক, এটা হচ্ছে টোটাল অপরচুনিস্টিক এ বাজেট।
There is a slash in the income tax regime, so that is welcome, but of course too late. But nevertheless, we talk about income tax, but where is the income? Where is the employment? I have to work and then I get my income.
इस अमृत काल के बजट के अंदर मैं निर्मला सीतारमन जी की लिखी हुई इस कहानी के अंदर अमृत ढूंढ रहा हूं, मुझे ढूंढने पे कहीं मेल नहीं रहा। हेल्थ का जो बजट है 2.2% से घटा के 1.98% कर दिया गया है। न रोजगार का कोई प्रावधान किया है, न किसान की आय बढ़ाने का कोई प्रावधान किया है, न ही अच्छे स्कूल कॉलेज के प्रावधान है।
इस बजट में आपको नौजवानों के रोजगार के लिए कुछ दिखा हो तो बताइए। 2 करोड़ नौकरी हर साल देने का वादा मोदी जी ने किया था। इस बजट में आपको भारत के अन्नदाता किसान के लिए कुछ दिखा हो तो आप बताइए मुझे।
कुछ भी नहीं मिला बिहार को। आप देखिएगा, बिहार ने इतनी बड़ी संख्या में यहाँ से सांसद भाजपा के लोगों को जितवाया।
Well, a majority of the opposition targeted the centre over this year's budget, but there were some who lauded the government as well, especially the move to cut taxes and a new tax regime, calling it a step that will ease the tax burden on the Aam Aadmi to an extent.
मिडिल क्लास को भी मदद है, सबको हर तरफ से कोई ना कोई दिया गया है। उम्मीद है कि इलेक्शन होंगे। मैं कहूँगा मुबारक हो इसको। 1.5 घंटा हमने अच्छी तरह से सुना।
But I am a believer in a low tax regime, so any tax cuts is welcome because giving more money in the hands of the people, in my opinion, is the best way to boost the economy.
Various initiatives that are taken by the Union Finance Minister are pro-common man. For example, the increase of the tax rebate, income tax rebate, the slab being changed from 5 lakh to 7 lakh, and also the tax slabs in the new tax regime are also pro-common man, and they reduce the burden on the common man.
But the centre has made its ambitions clear. It is not looking for quick fixes, but is thinking for the long term. The centre has announced 35% increase in capital expenditure in this year, but for all practical purposes, the investments made this year Another major announcement has been the increase in railway budget to 2.4 lakh crore rupees, an increase of 71%, which is 9 times the allocation from the Modi government's first budget in 2014. The centre has also hiked the allocation for PM Awas Yojana, a scheme for urban housing, by 66%. This is the largest hike in any of the schemes. The message is clear. This is a budget of renewed power. Also joining us is Parmeshwaran Iyer, CEO of Niti Aayog. Let me start with you, Mr. Iyer. Thank you very much for speaking to us. First and foremost, do you believe that this is a budget that has decided to stick to fiscal prudence?
I think it's a very, very balanced budget, and in fact, if you look at the economic survey yesterday, which said the recovery is complete, despite global headwinds, despite the pandemic, we are on a 7% growth trajectory. Inflation is under control. Fiscally, you asked about fiscal. Next year, the fiscal deficit is going to be below 6. I think it's 5.8. And the plan is that it will be 4.5 by 25-26. So I think all steps have been taken in that direction. And if you look at macroeconomic fundamentals, I think we're okay. And now that's on the growth side. And then, we can talk about the inclusion side if you want.
Also, there's been a pruning of subsidies for some key schemes, most notably for Manrega, Mr. Iyer. And the opposition is saying that this basically shows that the budget is anti-poor. What is the rationale for the pruning of subsidies in the key schemes?
Look, clearly this is a budget which is looking in the medium term. It's not a short-term, short-sighted budget. Capital expenditure is going to be 10 lakh crore. It's up 33% compared to last year, and many excess over even 2018. In addition to that, the government is continuing with the 50-year interest-free loan to states for capital expenditure, 1.3 crores for that. Also incentivizing the states to invest themselves in capital expenditure. So this is giving a huge push to infrastructure, to growth, to jobs. And so I think there's a clear signal that, there's a big push towards infrastructure, growth, jobs, and that signal. So it's not looking at it in short term.
Okay, let me also get in Mr. Sumant Sinha. First and foremost, what are your key takeaways, Mr. Sinha, from the budget?
My key takeaways. My key takeaways of the budget essentially are that this is a budget that has essentially solidified India's position at a time when there are a number of global uncertainties. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world, and I think this budget really is a great mixture and balance between a fiscal consolidation on the one hand and continuing to encourage growth on the other hand. So I think it really prepares the base for continued and sustainable growth of the Indian economy for the next several years. The fiscal deficit is down to 5.9%. There's a very strong push towards capex. I think to me that's the most important thing that has stood out. So I think all of that really prepares the ground for continued and long-term growth in the Indian economy over the next 7 years.
Largely the feeling was that given there is 9 states going to elections this year, and next year, of course, you have the big general election, that, some of the more popular and populist schemes would get the maximum outlay. What do you make of the government actually holding back on populism and going with more fiscal prudence? Sumant Sinha.
I think the budget does have long-term growth as its priority. I think the government has done a very good job of eschewing populism and really building for the long term. And I think this is a budget that really looks to build the future of India. And that is really, as I said earlier, the focus on capex clearly demonstrates that. The fact that there aren't a lot of giveaways, subsidies are under control. I think all of that shows that the government is really focused on enhancing the productivity of the economy, is looking at lowering the friction costs, is looking at improving the logistics and the connectivity, is looking at building the digital infrastructure, and doing all of that in a very sustainable and green-oriented manner. So I think all of that shows the government's commitments towards long-term sustainable growth.
You know, Ms. Kidwai, one of the most popular questions asked on a day like this, and that's what I want to start with you is, how do you rate the budget?
So I think this is an excellent budget. It's a pro-growth budget. It's at a time when there are global headwinds which could really impact a lot of the world. And for us to continue on this trajectory of growth is critical. And this budget has set that trajectory of growth and, in fact, surprisingly, has, in fact, increased the capital expenditure, which was already high last year. So we have what is 3.3% of GDP going into capital expenditure, which, if you include the interest-free loans and assistance to the states, will be at 4.5% of GDP, which is really terrific. It is much needed. It is going to be hopefully upfronted, as in the first couple of quarters of the forthcoming year. And this will put India on a good trajectory of growth, which is indeed what we need. Meanwhile, all this is not happening at the cost of macroeconomic stability through fiscal deficit management. The commitment to be at 5.9% and reminding us that the 4.5% target at 2026 for the fiscal deficit is very much in sight is also important. So a great juggling act between growth and macroeconomic stability.
But what do you make of the criticism that maybe it wasn't the best idea to actually make this new regime the default tax regime? Ms. Kidwai.
Well, I don't know if I agree that it's not the right way. The idea is to move to a simple tax regime without exemptions. The government could have just done that by not even giving people the option. But it's retained the option. It's cleaned it up somewhat in that the brackets have altered. But as explained by the finance minister in her speech, for every level, there is indeed relief, as well as in there will be a lower tax payment, whichever regime they opt for. So what we've seen is a reduction in the tax overall, a cleaning up, which is, yes, coaxing people to move towards a non-exemption, accept the one tax rate type of thinking, which is where the country would like to go, and indeed is the way we should go. And in the process, by leaving more money in the hands of the middle class, ensured that there is a feel-good factor and indeed more money to spend, which in turn will fuel growth because of the demand that comes from it.
Mr. Iyer, you did mention capital expenditure and the fact that the government plans to spend 10 lakh crores. How are we going to get the money for it? How are you going to get the money for it?
Look, revenues are pretty strong also. If you look at whether it's direct tax or you look at GST, GST now is, in December was about 1.5 lakh crores. So revenues are pretty buoyant, I would say. Misuse of GST has been clamped down upon. Direct taxes, there's an incentive, the taxpayer base has increased. So there is, of course, a deficit which is acknowledged, and that deficit will be brought down next year and then even further down by 25-26.
Now, but is disinvestment an area of concern, because last year's target was also missed by the government?
Look, the disinvestment program is, continues. There's a significant allocation there, and that program continues the way it has been, and it will continue to be a priority. The other aspect is asset monetization, which has, been going on in full steam. Whether you look at airports or ports or highways, etc. So I think bringing in private capital is a very important agenda for the government as well.
Now also, Mr. Iyer, coming to energy security, cutting down imports of fossil fuels or reducing our reliance on fossil fuels is stated ambition, but there have been many roadblocks to this. There's been an allocation made this budget for transition towards green energy, a separate allocation also for green hydrogen. What are the steps being taken for India to live up to its target of net zero emissions by 2070?
Look, I think India has got one of the most aggressive, nationally determined contributions in the world and positive towards climate. Whether you're talking about, the going into electricity capacity of 50% based on non-fossil fuel, or whether you're going to talk of our commitment to net zero by 2070, the non-renewable story, I mean, fossil fuels will of course continue, but there's a huge thrust on renewables. Look at the green hydrogen mission, 20,000 crores approximately allocated towards that for 5 million tons. Our renewables are about 40% of overall capacity, power capacity, a big thrust. And apart from that, if you look at the biofuel story, a big push in this budget on Gobardhan, using bio-agro waste for energy. So I think the thrust on renewables is a critical part of our overall climate commitments, and we are walking the talk on that. And not only that, what can people do? The program Lifestyle for the Environment, which was announced by the Prime Minister to the world at COP26, how individuals and communities can actually contribute to reducing emissions. There's a UNEP study which says that this can actually lead up to 20% reduction in emissions. So we are walking the talk on climate in all respects.
Mr. Sinha, what do you make of this massive increase that has happened in capital expenditure? What could be the thinking behind it, according to you?
No, I totally agree with that. Clearly, the increase on capex, if you look at the last 2 years, it's actually almost doubled total capex spend. Within that, there's a strong emphasis on railways, on roads, on airports and ports, on building the tourism infrastructure, on building the green economy, on urban development. So I think there are a number of things that really show the government's very strong commitment towards continuing to build, as I said, the India of the future, and continue to build the infrastructure of the Indian economy, which is so essential for us right now as the population increases. And just looking at the overall development of the country, there is a lot that needs to be done, and this government is clearly focused on making sure that at the fastest possible pace we do that. But keep in mind that there is another benefit, which is that as the government spending on capex increases, that creates demand across a number of different sectors, and that itself then becomes a driver of growth for the Indian economy.
Mr. Iyer, Mr. Sinha and Ms. Naina Lal-Kidwai, thank you very much for speaking to us. Important voices coming in from the industry, also from the government, but at least the focus of the centre has been made amply clear that they will leave the subsidies largely untouched, but they are going to give a massive push to infrastructure development, because the aim is not just to secure votes in the next year, but go much beyond. Thanks for watching.